All right, welcome everybody to this summer 2021 edition of Rally Founders Talk. Today we have Albert from Limitless, and Albert, one of the things that I need you to know about Rally, which you probably already know because you're a past awardee, but we've grown a lot since the last time you visited us, is that, you know, the main thing about Rally is we're here to help passionate entrepreneurs such as the ones around this screen, who come from all around the world, transform their early stage ideas into sustainable ventures that create positive social change. And the other thing that we've realized is that we meaning Orlando and where you're sitting at and I'm sitting at, we can be an international hub for social entrepreneurs. And that means, and the reason why we believe that is because we believe that we have all the talent, the skill sets, and the networks, and the resources to help passionate social entrepreneurs along their journey. And so you, not to build up pressure, are an example of that talent and those resources and networks. And so we want to definitely be able to showcase you not only to these folks, but also the world. So how do you feel about that, Albert?
I'm just grateful to be back with the Rally team, and super grateful for our experience with all of the team. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, listen, before we kick it off with a classic question, the one thing I want to do is just throw a compliment at your beard trimming game. That beard is excellent. The lines are so professional and crisp. And so I just wanted to head nod that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, or going to who you're going to. Well, Albert, listen, it'll be you, myself, and Ben will have this conversation, and how we like to start it off is talk to us about baby Albert, right? Where did baby Albert come from? And more importantly, what we want you to center around is not necessarily what baby Albert liked to eat or the things he liked to do, but kind of the influences that when you think back about who that person was, the influences that allowed you to help you become the person you are today, and why you're interested in what you're interested in.
Sure. So I grew up here in Florida, over in Tampa, and both my parents are musicians, and my mom is an educator. And my mom always would stress to us how important education was, and that education was your ticket, and no one can take it away from you once you've gone through it. And she pushed us really hard for a lot of things, whether it was school related, communication. And my mom would often tell us, doesn't matter how great of an idea you have, if you can't tell anyone and them understand it, it doesn't exist. And so she was always pushing me to consider, how does the art influence this? How does the communication, how does the story do that? And an example of something like that, with both my parents being in music and in sales, even at the grocery store, if we wanted like a particular type of cereal or something special, she would say, okay, well, sell me on why we should get this. And she wasn't unreasonable, but it was always had to be defended, and there had to be a reason and a story. And I think that has had a ripple effect in my life as an engineer, trying to appreciate the nuances and complexities of technical and professional communication, and then taking it a step further to be able to articulate in a way that makes people feel, especially in the nonprofit sector, where so much of it is about being proud that your community is coming together to make things better for others.
That's really cool, man. So she was you said a music teacher?
So she's a trained educator and also a musician, and ended up doing a lot of like curriculum writing and classes for music. Was also my substitute teacher quite often in middle school.
Oh, how did that make you feel? That's interesting.
She was a good teacher.
She was a good teacher. I'm sure you didn't you did all your work that day, right?
Of course.
You look like you were a good student. Were you a good student?
So I was like a B plus A minus student for most of my like middle school, high school, and I found math to be particularly difficult.
Oh, that's interesting. But in math is something obviously you use in engineering a lot.
Yes, I finished all the math required for like a PhD in engineering, and so like I worked through it, but I found that both engineering and math were really a test of like how badly did you want it more than it just coming like naturally. And my expression I tell a lot of our students is like math is a language that you learn, and then how you apply it, like that's more of like the engineering analysis side. And so I was never great at like learning languages, any of them. But once you know how to use it, then like you can start to unlock like the fun part, which is getting to
Yeah,
do stuff.
that's really cool. Did you know that you were going to be like, why engineering? Like, was it something?
Uh, yeah, so I wanted to be an engineer starting around sixth grade. And my mom had gotten me these like they were almost like playing cards, but they were all different career fields.
Mm,
And each card I'd go through, on the bus on the way to school, like what are these different things? And they were like unusual jobs that you wouldn't have like just picked up on, especially in the like the before internet was like super
yeah.
accessible thing. And one of the jobs on the back of the card was astro engineering. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I want to build space planes. And I like went to my science teacher and they were like, oh, that's weapons. Like it was a private faith-based school. And they were really concerned about some of my decision making. And I was really passionate about it and really believed that it can unlock a lot of things, a lot of positive things. And so I came to UCF wanting to do aerospace engineering, and I did a bachelor's and master's in aerospace and a PhD in mechanical. We didn't have an aero PhD at the time, but my advisor actually got it approved after I graduated. And otherwise, I would have probably done the PhD in aero as well. And I was almost through my entire academic curriculum, doing this like high temperature aerospace materials for like space plane reentry, or for jet engine blades to be more efficient. And I got a little distracted, and there was a local family who reached out and said, could you build our son a bionic arm? And I started doing that, and I would like do my research during the day and this limitless thing at night. And then by the time I was graduating with my PhD, I was doing like limitless during the day and a PhD at night, um, which is not recommended. And I have an incredible team who supported all of that, being able to make that happen, while I was still running around like crazy. And post graduation, I made the jump into biomedical engineering, which I don't have degrees in. And a lot of it was actually because we just drove to hospitals in other states and we showed them our technology, of what we were working on and why we were working on it and that we believed it. And there's two parts to that. One, it's difficult in your hometown, especially when they know you as like a college student, to break through. And then two, if you really believe in it, you drive up on spring break to Johns Hopkins when you have a connection there, and you just demo your stuff and hope that they like it. And it worked. And because of that, we launched our first clinical trial. The doctor actually moved to Portland, which is a much longer drive, so we had to fly. And that led to the US first clinical trial for 3D printed prosthetics for children.
Wow, that's a great story, man.
Yeah, I'd like the first thing that pinged in me is like I liked space planes too as a kid. I liked building Legos, but I never got to the fun part of math. Like I was thinking about that. then so I like quit. But then I'm like thinking about you're talking about how badly do you want it, and that thing about you driving up to Johns Hopkins and on the spring break. I feel like most entrepreneurs, I have had that feeling where I just got to a point where I decided it doesn't matter what obstacle comes in front of me. If somebody builds a wall in front of me, I'm going to either figure out how to go through it or over it. And it seems like once you get on an idea or a solution or a problem that you're that passionate about, an entrepreneur always gets there. Do you remember a moment where you were like, this is the thing I'm going to do? Do you remember a moment where it clicked, or a particular problem where you can remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get around this problem, but I'm not going to stop until I get around it? Do you remember a moment when that drive really hit you?
Yeah, I think it was on that Hopkins trip, and we took two pieces of technology with us. We took the 3D printed arm, and then our next project, which was this, it's a face-driven wheelchair control system that you use your like jaw muscles or temporalis muscles to control wheelchairs, and it's designed originally for ALS or quadriplegic patients. And so we were at Hopkins driving this experimental wheelchair with a bunch of arms in the back. And Hopkins is a relatively, like, the building we were in was relatively older, and so it's not like super accessible in wheelchairs. And when you drive in to a hospital in a wheelchair, people naturally, like, they look at you a little bit differently. There's a lot of stigma around that we're trying to combat. But then also when you have like these electrode leads coming off of your forehead, then people like really notice. Even at Hopkins, where I thought this would be like more normal, but I'm driving down the hallway and we're like trying to get the chair to work. And, you know, anytime you go to do a demo, the technology is a little iffy, right? And the corridors were so narrow. And they had set us up in this conference room where the surgeon we were wanting to work with had brought like the department leads and a bunch of other doctors and the occupational therapy team. And they're like, okay, well, it's right in here. And it was a 90-degree hard turn in a hallway that barely fit the wheelchair. And I was like, this is that moment. I can either get up out of the wheelchair and show that, like, I don't have a lot of confidence in our technology, or I'm going to try to make this 90-degree turn using my jaw muscle that I'm not sure I can do. And I was like, this is it. I'm either going to hit the wall and embarrass myself, or I'm going to make it in the door. And you know, it had broken the ice either way. And we like zoomed around the corner, got in there, and they were like, whoa, okay, this is something. And because of that moment, when we went to Mayo Clinic with that project too. And in a conference, I was helping speak at the conference, and during that time was in the wheelchair driving around the audience in between the chairs, and that's what sold one of their directors on, like, okay, this technology was ready, that a person could actually use it, was because they had to see it in action, not just a PowerPoint, and they had to know that you, as like one of the creators of it, believed in it that much. And I had never like done a presentation while driving around. I'm trying to talk without like adjusting the sensors. But there's those moments where you're like, I have to do this. Like, I can't have not put my all into it, whether it works or not. After that, like, I'll be okay, but I want to give it my all. And then hopefully you back it up and you have a great team that can bail you out when you make those decisions.
I love that moment, that 90-degree turn where it's like, this is it. Like, we're going to go for it right here. And I'd rather go for it than play it safe. And there's no going back. I love that moment. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs can point to moments like that. It's really cool to have it so vivid. It's like on that 90-degree turn. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's, first of all, shame on John Hopkins, right, for building those narrow hallways. So, but, and in my mind, I was thinking, like, you're just going to say, well, you, instead of making a 90-degree turn, you just started spinning around in circles, and somebody had to stop you.
That happened in the parking garage. Yeah.
Oh, it did. Okay. So thankfully, you had that experience, and you were able to work out those kinks and know that what not to do. I want to go back on Ben's thing. You said originally, in terms of like the motivation, you were headed towards aerospace. I too was like also interested in that. I don't know why. I think that I had an influence because I lived in DC. I visited the Smithsonian Aerospace Museum all the time, right? I was always trying to figure out like how to build planes. And I even sent and I talk about this, I sent a spec to the Air Force just I picked some random address. It was probably like somebody completely unassociated with what I was doing, but it felt right as a kid. But I sent a spec on an airplane because I was like, it makes no sense if an airplane gets shot down, why the guy needs to like parachute into enemy territory. That was like the thing. And I said, I can solve this. Instead, when the plane gets shot, the front piece will come off and turn into another plane, and it can fly back to where it goes. I mean, like thinking about it later on as an adult, it was a terrible idea, but I mean, I was trying, right? But that explains why I'm not an engineer today. But I was fascinated by engineering. I also had an issue with mathematics, and then later on went to college, became great at math. But I want to circle back to when you got that letter, right? Or the parent called you about making an arm. What was compelling? Was it just like, was it the challenge of, like, what caught you to say, oh, like, this is something I want to pay attention to?
So there had been an interview on the radio maybe a year prior to that with the people who were building these first 3D printed mechanical hands. And no electronics, no wires, just kind of body powered. You flex your wrists and the fingers would kind of open and close. And the technology, like, it was really promising. And I cold emailed them after listening to this interview. And one person was in South Africa, and then Ivan was up in Washington State. And I was like, hey, how can I help? Like, I have this software, we get software from school, maybe I can do some design work. And it wasn't going anywhere. And I went to one of our local hospitals, and I was like, oh, there's this idea. I think this could be something. And I made one of those first little things. And I look back on it now and I realize why they didn't call me back after they gave me the tour. And they were like, oh, good college student wants to be involved. This is great. But no. And that was really motivating. And so then when there was a real family who had reached out, they had found my name on an email, on a web page somewhere. I was like, oh, I can't not help them. I don't know, it was just innate. And then once you meet them, you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to figure out how to do this, because I don't know how to do this. That's going to be a real challenge. And that's where you put together the team and you say, like, we're doing this either way. And it was an 8-week project because I was leaving the country after graduating with my master's to do part of my PhD research for a year overseas. And so I told the team, I was like, yes, we have to do this impossible task. We have no idea how we need to do it. And by the way, we have 8 weeks. And so they thought I was insane. But we got it done. We got the prototype done. And then just every day after that, that Limitless kept existing. It was, I realized, like, I just couldn't let it go, because I had seen how much it could transform one family's life. And we knew we were getting emails from around the world from other families. And it just couldn't walk away. And so that's a tough thing.
Can you say, yeah, I was thinking, because I don't remember this. I remember, Albert, when you came through Rally and we were thinking about the 3D printing aspect was really new at the time. And so I don't remember the electronics, like molded prosthetics where they would mass produce them. Did they have the same electronic components and that hadn't been put in a 3D printed one before? Like what was the thing that the ground that you were breaking there that you were like, we have to do something new?
So the traditional way of making these prosthetics would be to, like, cast them out of like a silicone, or it's a complex process, depends on the company, and they have electronics in them for these expensive ones, but they tend to be between like $40,000 to $100,000, depending on the level of complexity, the level of dexterity. And a lot of times they're not marketed or prescribed for children because of that cost and the growth rate of children. And so we had created our own electronics that were a little bit more simplistic, but were easier to learn how to use and still kind of accomplish the same goal. And then the 3D printing side, we knew that that plastic, right? It didn't matter originally what the shape was, because it could be anything you wanted it to be. And that is the powerful part of 3D printing, is to be able to make that tailored, whether it's dimensions tailored to the human, or the art being just what the expression of that human wants to. And so now Limitless is a hybrid, part 3D printed. We use 3D printing to now make molds to be able to then vacuum form the cosmetic components. And our electronics have gotten way better because my colleague John has just continued to refine it down into these little chips. And that was a big difference from some of the big prosthetic companies. They made these electronics in the 80s or 90s. And so they're like kind of how printer technology used to have these huge motherboards on the back of a printer. And now it's just like a little chip. We've helped continue to pioneer that forward. What I realized early on with our team is that it wasn't just like the device, right? Like the device is like one component, but the challenge for prosthetics is like the cost and the insurance side. But then that is adjusted or affected by the ability to learn how to use it, the ability to like rescale it, the ability to keep kids using the device over a longer amount of time. And so we went kind of in as a full system where they helped design the cosmetic component with us. There's a video game training system now, and we partnered with UCF's video game school and School of Visual Arts and Design to create these mobile app training games that they can pair with a special muscle controller that we make to learn how to use their arm ahead of time or during the process. And those kind of things helped unlock like what Limitless would become, which is this like full system of the aesthetics, the training, the actual arm, the community behind it. And I think that made a really big difference.
Wow. There's so much in that discovery process that I want to bookmark that, but can you tell the story about how you got your first attention, that Iron Man arm that you made, just so people, if they haven't seen that story, can hear that from you?
Yeah. So I was sitting in an apartment in Germany by myself, and I got this random LinkedIn message from someone claiming to be working with Microsoft. And I was like, I don't know if this is real. This was 2014, end of 2014. And I was skeptical. And one of the things that like Rally taught us was how to like filter who wants to give you advice and who wants to like, some people want to claim you, or some people want to kind of like leverage you and your story. And so I was very nervous about all this stuff at the time. And they were like, hey, we want to interview you for this thing. And they wouldn't tell me what the thing was. And they were like, I said, okay, it's a 9-hour time difference to Washington State. And they were like, okay, well, 3 p.m. is when we're available. Is midnight too late for you? And I was like, this is just rude. Like a complete misunderstanding of time around the world. And I was just like, okay, yes, I'll do it. And it absolutely changed my life, our company. And they told me we won, and they didn't tell me what it was. And they said, we're booking you a flight back here. And I showed up 2 weeks later on campus, and they had a semi truck full of filming equipment. And I didn't know what we were getting into. And we filmed this first video, which Microsoft used a lot as part of the partnership. And then they sent that to Robert Downey Jr. And they were like, so what's the pitch? And I was like, well, bionics, right? Great. And so he got involved and was like, I'm a bionics expert on hand, and I wanted to talk to the young kid. And we had made this like replica of what Iron Man's armor would have looked like if it was a real prosthetic. And the team was incredible. And like in transparency, like I was not in the country for most of that development time. But we were there, and we told that story. And the video just went viral. Like almost every country in the world has like logged into that website or seen the videos. And something later, like I don't know, 50 million views on Facebook, and the YouTube, actually, Microsoft just took it off of their, it's like an unlisted video now after 5 or 6 years. So we have it on our website as a backup. But yeah, it was incredible because people hadn't looked at prosthetics like they could be as much self-expression and the empowerment side of sending a kid into school with a doll plastic prosthetic doesn't amplify their creativity. It doesn't make them feel the way that they can feel if they're their favorite superhero or their favorite like fashion style. And that's what we wanted to do, was to be able to provide that like tailored, it's you, it's your device, it's your helper tool. And then believing that we could do it at a cost point where we could give them away for free.
Man, okay, so I do remember seeing that commercial, and it was prior to knowing you. So it does. I was like, oh, this is the people, like they're right here. So you're kind of like a celebrity locally, and that's kind of cool. But I want to talk about, like, when I listen to you talk about the journey with Limitless, like there were quite a few things that you had to overcome, right? Like not only were there technical things that you had to deal with, but when you talk about like children and the fact that they grow and they change, it's not like you're putting a prosthetic on an adult who pretty much stays the same, but it was a child who's growing. I could then begin to understand then why an insurance company will balk at something like that, right? Because they're like, well, the cost associated with producing this product on a child who's going to use it for a limited window, and therefore it doesn't make sense for you to spend that money. And then you think about, like, you talk about like the function or the form aspect of it, and how children, how the form of it really unlocks children's in terms of their confidence and their ability to do things. And so there are so many different complexities that were happening when you were going through this process. Was it like, did you have all this on paper, or were you just constantly just learning, and just as you bump up to things, you were just saying and responding to the challenges? Talk to us about that process, discovering like those pain points and how to solve it in a way where ultimately you can get products into people's arms, on people's arms.
So July was our 7th anniversary of that very first Bionic Arm. And it was an unpainted block of an arm, and it worked, which was the important part at the time. But we thought that the children would want to like have it be low profile, kind of not a bright, flashy color. And the thing that we learned is that you listen to the children first. And so as soon as the kid had the first arm, Alex said, can I paint it bright orange? Orange is my favorite color. And we're like, are you sure like that's what you really want? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And then we learned from that it wasn't about blending in. It was about standing out and kind of like transforming that conversation of what the prosthetic was for to be additive, instead of filling in a disability, which we didn't view these children as having disability. It was changing that conversation to be, this is a piece of your identity, and your own self-expression, and it does help you with certain tasks, but it really changed the way we looked at it. And I totally credit, like, we listened to the parents, we listened to the kids. We didn't know what we were doing, and we knew we didn't know what we were doing, at least as much as possible at the time. And I think that was part of our rally pitch, was that we know that we don't know a lot, and we were hoping for having a mentor who can really help us get to the next level. And that, like, vulnerability or transparency, I think is one of the things that's kept us going. Is we know we don't have the experience, but we know someone out there can speak to that voice, and then hopefully we can aggregate that and continue to use the innovation and our technology here to be able to help others.
I really like that idea of listening to the parents and the kids, but I also am intrigued by your talking about getting insurance companies on board. And I feel like a lot of the way that you're listening to the student comes out of your social enterprise strategy, where it's like, we really want to solve this problem more than we want to deliver a product. So we want kids to have this thing rather than we want to sell them something. But one of the things we talk about with social entrepreneurs a lot is separating users from customers, and the customers are the ones that give you the money. You need the users to want the product, but you've got to also deliver something to the customers. Would you say that the kids and maybe the parents are your users and the insurance companies are your customers? Is that how you think about it, or do you think about it differently?
Yeah, I think the long term, that's the goal. And we went to the insurance companies and we said, okay, so tell us, like, why is this an issue? Here's what we're doing, here's what we want to accomplish. And we really pitched them. We were like, here's the economic value to you if we're successful, the reduction in costs, the kids' outcomes, and that it could really change, like, not just their physical well-being, but like their career outcomes if we're teaching them about STEM and they're more excited to go to school. And really, I think that's what it boils down to for children is if you're not afraid to be in your classroom, your life goal, outcome, potential changes. And that's why I really loved hearing before this part of the session, some of the education focused for children, because if you can get kids into the classroom and want to be there, they're way more likely to be successful. And so we saw the arm with a lot of that. And that's a great point, that the insurance companies have to be a partner in it if we really want to transform the system. Now, the user, that's who we're really designing for, but in terms of the device, but for the system that we're building, we went there and we said, okay, so what's the cost point that it has to be? What's the quote unquote proof that you need? Because I had grown up thinking it was like you have to prove it to the FDA, and the FDA cares a lot about these things. And what I learned is like the FDA cares a lot about like how did you document it? Where did you build the device? Did you file all your paperwork? The insurance companies care a lot about like, is it better? Is it less expensive? And does it like have a quality of life benefit? And using that initial like information that they gave us, we were able to go and establish those clinical trials to prove the answers to the questions we think the insurance companies are going to hold us to. And if you set out on your own path and you just like do the stuff, and then you get all the way to the end and they're like, well, we just don't know if it solves this like magic box on their checkbox of things can it be insured, then you've wasted a lot of time. And so we try to do that early on in the hopes of accelerating the process. But it's a great point. There is a difference between the two.
So I appreciate you walking through that, because one of the things I'm very honest about is that I made the mistake of building products and moving too far ahead and spending a lot of time and money, and then when it finally gets to the person who pays for it, it just falls flat, right? And if I would have just stepped back and just spent more time in the feedback loop and trying to understand not only how people use the product, but then also like the barriers, the cost issues and things like that, it would make life easier. So I appreciate you walking through there, because one of the things we do is encourage entrepreneurs to say, listen, like the best thing you can do is create a feedback loop extremely early and slow down your building. Like don't overbuild, right? Like start small, prove it. It might be a little ugly, right? It's the thing that you talked about. You put it in front of the kid. He said, hey, let's do it this way. You realize that it has an ability to unlock this creativity, and it can become something special for the child. But then also simultaneously trying to address some of the areas, understanding clearly who your customer is, and understanding that there's areas that you have to satisfy with them, right? And it will impact, your build costs and your production costs. And so just to be constantly in the loop in terms of feedback and building incrementally and not getting too far ahead is super important for entrepreneurs. So we got a few minutes before we open it up to Q&A, but I want to ask you this, Albert. Like, is there, when you think about like your journey in terms of building Limitless, are there some practical pieces of advice or wisdom? Let's say three. I mean, if you truly feel limitless on this, you can go 4. But is there some stuff that you can give to the folks on the call? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
So I really do believe whether it's entrepreneurship, if it's sports or math, it is a test of how badly do you really want it and why do you want it. And if you can get through those two things, there you really have unlimited potential for that. For Limitless, it was how many days can you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And it was years. It was like 5 years before we launched our first clinical trial. And we had been saying the whole time we were going to like do this thing the same way. So that would be number one, is like, why do you want it badly enough? And being able to convince you and convince others. Number two would be tell a great story. A great story can cover up a lot of issues on the back end. That was something that Rally really talked to us about, was how to make that connect to people on an emotional level instead of just going down the technical path of like why your thing was better. And I think Ben gave me a few lectures on like they know it's going to be good, but why should they care about it being better as opposed to how it's better. And then number three, have a really good team that you can trust, and pair that team with mentors who have an outside perspective that can see if you're going off course. And that's one of the things we found with Rally, and one of the things we took away for a long time after seeing, some great mentors in some areas where we tried to avoid it. And I think that those three things kind of sum up entrepreneurship, and it's hard every single day. I don't know, the people ask like, how do you get more people into entrepreneurship? And it's like painful and difficult all the time. But then you get those like bright creative spark moments and you're like, oh, that's why we're doing this, because we actually want to change something that seems unchangeable in the world around us.
Yeah. Albert, can I double tap on that first one you said about, I'm surprised a lot at how often entrepreneurs don't do the mental work of getting high clarity on their personal why. It's like there's an intuitive motivation where it's like, oh, this is just what the world needs. But when you go through the work of understanding very clearly why you want it and being able to say it in a compelling and succinct way, going back to your mom, like your idea is only as good as you can describe it to somebody else, right? Is really powerful. And I think we underestimate sometimes how powerful it can be for us, the entrepreneur, getting up out of bed every day. Once you're able to say to yourself very clearly, I've done the work, I've looked at myself, I've asked myself hard questions. This is why I do this thing that I do. It's like a rallying cry that gets you up back to work through the hard times. So I appreciate you saying that, man.
And you'll hear from a lot of people, they want to go into entrepreneurship because they want to be their own boss and they don't want to have another boss. And like, that's just like, to me, the worst way of doing it, because like, I'm a terrible boss. Like, I'm learning every day to try to be like adequate, and I'm terrible on me. Like, another boss would treat me better. And I think that's like a self-reflection a lot of us have, is like doing it through a normal like corporate job would have been easier or more comfortable in a lot of ways. And I worry that on the entrepreneur side, like we sometimes like magnify this, like you get to set your own hours, and they don't tell you that means all the hours are going to be applied to your idea. And they're like, but you get to pick them, and it's just between like 5 a.m. and like 5 a.m. Yeah, I think that's really tough. When we get people into this game, you have to want to change something, I think, in order to sustain that energy over 5 years or almost 10 years. And you have to be able to see through like the mess up front to what it could be. So for example, I'm in this little conference room in our new facility that Limitless just moved into 2 weeks ago. And it's just over 5,000 square feet in total space. And when we were pitching to Rally, we were in the same amount of space that this conference room is. And we had like senators came to this little office and we're like, wait, where's the other door? Is there like more room? We're like, no, you just have to, you have to trust us. Like in 5 years, this becomes like a big thing. And I think people just thought I was losing my mind, but we're like finally moving into what I had hoped we would have been at like 5 years ago. But it meant showing up to a little like broom closet every day or working from your couch every day in the hopes of being able to change the system. And in the chat conversation, I think it was from Hannah, asked about like, what is my motivation for this? And I think for me, like, there's different ways to describe it, right? So everyone can be like outraged, right? And outraged is like a high intensity flame, but usually short lived. And then there's like, after that burns off, right, the coal that's underneath that of like why you really want something to be changed, and being able to like keep that like lower flash but more enduring flame of why you want something. And for me, like I have my own like health challenges, and I've seen how the system can be broken, and then I've listened to these families and I've seen like the eyes and the smiles and also the tears around the system, and like that builds up, right, and it compresses down into this ember that can really sustain a long-term drive. And that's the hardest part with entrepreneurship, is that it's not for one day or it's not for 1 year. And when we talk about doing sprints on our team, like for me the sprints are like 2 years, and those are like adding to the overall picture, but like you have to be able to maintain that for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You can't do it on outrage alone or on like whimsy or just like for the thrill of being your own boss or being able to work in a coffee shop as opposed to like a normal corporate office. It has to be something that deep down you care about. And so that's my challenge and advice is you don't have to know that on day one, right? The initial flame of outrage for a system being broken or for wanting to make a change or seeing an opportunity can sustain you, but then you have to aggregate that down into the thing that's going to like pull it through.
Yeah, I love the analogy about getting it down to cold, right? Because that's that vividly in my mind, which you obviously take your second advice about storytelling, because that painted a very clear picture in my mind of coal going into an engine of a locomotive that's just hauling, right? And that's what they use. They don't use paper, they use coal because it has the ability to hold heat for a long period of time. It's the same things. And so I really appreciate you walking through that imagery with us. The other thing I wanted to also kind of revisit really quick about your last piece of advice is about the team, right? And I want to I appreciate you bringing that up, because one of the things I noticed about you is that you've been super transparent and humble. Like you've said countless times there are things that you don't know, and you were transparent about that. And so we talk to our entrepreneurs about the importance of understanding, like, what do you not know, right? It's okay not to know everything, right? We don't, because we have a tendency to posture as though we know everything, and it's okay not to know. And so therefore that not knowing gives us opportunities to put really smart people who have great chemistry around us to fill in those gaps, and we can trust them to fill in those gaps. We can lean on them as team members, and they can lean on us when the time is needed. The other thing that you also that I noticed in you was that you that, you know, having it all together, right? Like not knowing, but then like your space, your product. And so oftentimes we encourage entrepreneurs, it's like, just own that, right? Like you are where you're at. It's okay to put a baby out there that's slightly ugly, you know. The goal is that, like, because this baby's not going to always end up that way. You have a vision in your mind where you want to where you want to see it, but you got to get the baby out there, right? Your office can be your little broom closet is part of the story, right? Like all of these things are part of the story. And so I really, like I said, once again, I appreciate your transparency and honesty about being okay with being messy, being okay with not knowing things, and encouraging our entrepreneurs to embrace those things and use them as opportunities to build great teams and to tell good stories. We got about 10 minutes. So what I want to do is I want to open it up to the fellows to ask questions to Albert. Raise your hand if you have a question. Casey, I guess you can see, help me quarterback this. If you have a question, raise your hand for us.
All right, go ahead, Ken.
Thank you, Albert. Our paramedics program is a nonprofit, and we were fully grant funded, and now we're primarily fee funded. I had the pleasure of seeing your presentation as a member of the Rotary Club of Dr. Phillips, and we turned around recently and gave a donation from our foundation, I believe, as well. So what's your financial model? Is it a combination? Are you open to grants, and the insurance fees? What's that model look like?
Yeah. So number one, we are super appreciative for the Rotary Club and for taking the time to visit us and for the support. And Limitless as a business model is not a great one. And this is something that we've worked with the rally makers, and they're like, this is not sustainable. You need to change this. And it was, as I looked at where the company was going, one, I didn't know how to do it. And two, then we had to figure out how we were going to do it in different pieces. And so we have been adding on different revenue streams, whether that was philanthropy, which is our driving thing right now. We also get a lot of in-kind support for material, whether that's plastic or paint or electronics, and going to those companies and telling them why we're using things. We added in sponsorship, and so many of the rooms now at Limitless are sponsored by a big tech company or a big beverage company in the case of two of them. And we started adding in sponsorship. Being based at the university, our goal is to get research dollars to be able to advance our work and our clinical trials, which is the area I'm less proficient in and trying every day to get better at. And then the long-term goal is to have that point of sale or point of reimbursement from insurance companies. And I think when we were working with Rally, we were in the 50 to 100K in donations. And in the last fiscal year, it looks like we hit I think we hit for the first time $1 million in different revenue streams for the very first time. And as a nonprofit, that was a threshold goal. And to do it during a pandemic was absolutely terrible because it was just a nightmare the entire year. And now it's still going. And I have no idea how we're going to repeat that success. But now that we know we can do it, it's about sustaining it and then diversifying our revenue portfolio. Because as a nonprofit, I think that's one of the most important things is to have enough buckets in case one bucket becomes compromised. You can fill it in with something else. And then our general philosophy is spend less money and find ways to do things more affordably, more creatively. And so we leveraged other industries that were better at certain things, and we applied them into the field of prosthetics. Or even in a more tangible example is in our lab design, we went to a restaurant supply company instead of an office or academia supply company, and we saved 60 to 80% on everything that we bought. And those little things add up. And it was just being able to see a different environment. So people like to work at tables. Restaurants buy a lot of tables, which lowers the cost per table, and they're designed to hold up really well against people abusing them, which is great because we have a lot of young staff and students here that are going to really use these tables. And so it was you could buy it from an academic world and it's going to be 5 times the price. Or you can go to the people who specialize in tables. And we've tried to apply that, whether it's electronics, whether it's paint, and plastics, to realign some of those things and just have to approach things differently when you don't have a big budget.
Man, that's awesome. Ben, I know that really resonates with Ben, because Ben, that's his life. Part of his life model is to spend less money.
That's right.
So I'm the opposite. I'm you spend more money, get better results, but whatever, it works. All right, who's next?
I think Josh was next.
Josh, Mr. Footman.
Yes, sir. How many times did you encounter a moment to where you felt like a group was going to make a move on your product and then pull the rug from underneath you, because I hear in your voice a lot of resiliency, and I'm pretty sure you've had those moments. So how many times did you encounter that? Because it's very, very, it's a hard process to endure those type of no's.
Yeah. So the question at the beginning of the call was like, what's your differentiator? What's your like cost saver? How are you going to do it differently? And in the world of like pharmaceuticals, they have all the money, right? Like they're billions of dollars in revenue, these big prosthetics companies. So like, how in the world could you ever compete with them? Because if they want to do it, right, like they could throw $1 billion behind it and have plenty of money left over. So we had to do things that they would find to be not worth doing or unconventional. And that's how we approached it, was to be able to continue to, yes, you can make a prosthetic, but can you make it look like Iron Man? Maybe, maybe not. Can you make it have a video game training system? And like in my head, there's these like these charts, right? And it's the overlap between all those circles, and like, can anyone else also do the electronics, also do the paint, also do the storytelling, the branding, and then manage like the clinical research? And like that overlap becomes very, very small. And that's where you find your real value as a company, as opposed to just the IP. Is like IP can be worked around, like people can throw money at things and just produce them if they want to, and then you have to defend and challenge them. But if you start to find like what your really unique overlap of different skills is, that's how you can be resilient in that. And then at least it helps you, like, you feel more comfortable knowing like this is really hard to do. And that's why it takes like people from every different discipline. And Limitless started as just a group of engineers and some other majors that were like helping in on it. And now it is like completely interdisciplinary, from art to game design to the education side and the engineering side. And that's what we learned, is that like the problems we want to solve are too big for a single discipline to do. And that's why they haven't been solved before, even by companies who have a lot of money to play with or to throw at projects.
Yeah, that's really cool. We got time for one more question.
I think Gordon had his hand raised.
There you go.
Actually, all good. You basically covered what I was going to ask in the last two answers. Really awesome story, though. Actually, no, I do have one question. I take it back. So in the early phases or early stages, so you guys earlier you guys were 3D printing and then using the actual plastic as the device itself, and then you've transitioned into kind of like this, you making into a mold and kind of like vacuum bag. I don't know if it's like carbon fiber vacuum bagging that you're doing. When did you make that transition? And then like was learning like kind of the processes behind the vacuum bagging process something that you guys tried to ingest and learn yourselves, or is that something you guys are outsourcing in the area or across the country, or what was that transition like?
So we actually use like a thin sheet of plastic that we heat up and then pull a vacuum around it, and it just like suctions it around, almost like if you took saran wrap around something, but then it cools and it becomes like Lego plastic. So we use the same plastic, ABS plastic, whether we're printing it, vacuum forming it, or injection molding it. And little by little, we've been adding to this. And my colleague, John, added the vacuum forming and did some experiments with it, and then found the right machine that fit kind of our price point and our like footprint of what the arms needed to be. And we were able to really implement that well, and it was a lifesaver. And then both John and Dominique have both they salvaged this old injection molding machine, and like we replaced all the guts to it, added all, it was without electronics before, and now it has like a little touch display. And we've started converting our parts from 3D printing into injection molding. And in order to do that, we had to be able to make the molds. And so we got either CNC equipment, or we were trying with resin printers as well. And so now we have this like hybrid machine that is part 3D printed plastic or 3D printing in the design to then produce a vacuum forming or another mold part. And that conversion is a big deal, but it also gave us room to integrate more metallic parts or more custom metallic parts, and then better interface with our electronics. And so like we're very much using 3D printing. But after like years and years and years of like 3D printing everything, we got really tired of like having to polish everything to make it look beautiful, because 3D printing naturally comes out a little bit rugged. And so it is still all ABS plastic, and that has been a huge leveraging point to keep the weight down, because for children, the weight of the prosthetic is the biggest issue. They can be on the market like between like 4 pounds, 5 pounds, up to like 8 to 10 for adults. And when we give a child, like our device weighs like roughly like 1.5 pounds, they still say it can be too heavy. And so that some of that goes into the training and the occupational therapy of like how we make it better, how do we distribute the weight better. But it really comes down to like how you adapt. And people knew us, especially when we were at Rally, like we were the 3D printing group, and 3D printing was new and it was novel. But now it's like much more common, and we've kind of adapted to that, continue to evolve what we're doing to best serve the system or the thing we're trying to change, as opposed to just being like locked into 3D printing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love that story of a Frankenstein resurrected injection molding machine. Not because I know anything about injection molding, but because it, like, for me, that story illustrates how much like we can figure anything out. So like you might not be needing an injection molding or figuring out plastics, right? But we all have areas where we might be tempted to go, that solution is too expensive, too complex. It's a wall that I can't climb through. And I love the story of the Frankenstein injection molder, because it points out that like everything is just a thing that we can figure out a way around, if we're determined to. So way to go, Albert. I'm excited to see what y'all come up with next, man.
Albert, listen, I would have thought that you would have said, I appreciate the story about the Frankenstein thing too, but in my head, I had the solution to all your problems, right? Which is you buy the highest quality 3D printer out there in the world. And then you make a 3D print of that printer, you return that printer back. Now you have a free high quality 3D printer, and then you 3D print everything.
So we went the route of partnering with the 3D printer company, and they're now one of our like named partners in Stratasys. Okay. But we found that their like lower grade printer works best for us because they make these like super high end multicolor. They make print like flexible materials, but those materials don't hold up in UV as well, or over like years. The plastic can degrade. And so we found that that's what you're basically it was cheaper to get automotive paint and paint over it to stop the UV or to stop the crack propagation. And so then we went and partnered with an automotive paint company and found out how to do that. And they came and they're teaching us how to do it better. And it's the same way they paint things at like theme parks. So there is a more expensive machine, but sometimes a good coat of paint can solve the same problem, and then also give you the canvas to be expressive and to like really tell that story.
And then you partner with people too. I mean, it's always
you have to partner.
And as Ben says, better do things with friends. You know, like that's a good thing. Well, man, listen, we appreciate your time today for joining us. You definitely helped us show that Orlando's where it's at, right? Like, we have smart people, we have the networks. And so if you're a social entrepreneur anywhere in the world, take a stop through here and go visit Albert and his team over in their fancy 5,000 square foot facility, which sounds like a peach. So thanks, man, for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity and for all that Rally's done for us.